Ground Zero, Chapter 21, Brandon, the Sky Lobby. A plane had hit the South Tower. A second plane. Brandon still couldn't believe it, but he'd seen it. Flying in, turning at the last second so that it hit the South Tower full on. Not an accident. Deliberate. An attack. But by whom and why? Brandon was so distracted he almost tripped as he followed Richard and his floor mates down the stairs. They formed two rows going down side by side, Esther leading Mr. Corey by the elbow. In front, Anson and his guide dog behind them following the railing. Brandon and Richard together in the rear. Brandon wanted to run down the stairs to get out of the North Tower as quick as he could, but Anson and Mr. Corey couldn't go any faster. At least the stairs are better than the last time, Esther said, after the bombing. Brandon looked up. What bombing? He asked. Tara set off a bomb in the parking garage under the building, Richard explained. Back in '93, Brandon's dad had been working in Windows on the World then, but it was no wonder Brandon didn't remember it. He'd only been a year old. Was anybody hurt, Brandon asked. A few people died and 1,000 more were hurt, Richard told him. It was a scary time. It couldn't have been as scary as today, Brandon thought. It took us 3 hours to get downstairs that day, Esther said. The bomb took out the building's power and you couldn't see a blessed thing in the stairs. They were total caves. It was chaos. All the smoke from the bomb came up the stairs. You couldn't breathe. Now at least there's fluorescent paint on the walls, but they didn't make the stairs any wider. Why did terrorists bomb the World Trade Center back then? Brandon asked. Is this another terrorist attack? I don't know, kid. Maybe so, said Richard. I don't know who else would do it. The ones who bombed the building back in '93 said they did it because we kept sticking our noses in the Middle East and they wanted us out. But why the World Trade Center? Brandon asked. It's a pretty easy target, said Esther, and a pretty noticeable one too, sticking up taller than everything else around it. Brandon still didn't understand. What purpose did attacking the Twin Towers serve, hurting all these innocent people? Down and down they went. Broken light fixtures hung from the ceiling, and water streamed down around their feet, but not as much as before. There were more cracks in the walls too, 10 floors down from where the first plane had hit. Through some of them, Brandon could see flames. Why were there some floors on fire and others weren't? They didn't stop to find out. You doing okay, Anson? Richard asked. Yes, I'm fine, he called back, even though his voice sounded strained. How about you, Mr. McCory? Richard asked. I too am all right, Mr. McCory said in heavily accented English. You seem very calm, Mr. McCory, Esther told him. Brandon had been thinking about that too. How could the old man be so chill with everything that was going on? Mr. McCory shrugged. In 1978, I come to the United States from Lebanon, where these wars like this happened when I was a young man, waving his hand at the destruction. I'm a refuge once. Now I'm a refuge again. Brandon didn't understand. The United States wasn't at war with anybody. Were they? No, not that he knew of, but maybe now they were. Brandon thought going downstairs would be easy. It was certainly easier than going up, but his legs burned and his feet ached, and all he wanted to do was sit down and rest, but he knew he couldn't stop. Not for long. Besides, if Mr. Corey could do it, Brandon could do it. Despite his age, Mr. Corey moved right along at his slow, deliberate pace and never stopped once and never complained. At the 78th floor, they came to the highest of the two sky lobbies, where people got on and off at the local elevators that serviced the floors above and below them. This was where I was headed in the first elevator when I left Windows on the World, Brandon had realized with the start. How long had it taken him to go 30 floors? Let's get out of here and see if we can find somebody in charge, Richard suggested, and the group exited the stairwell. The last time Brandon had been through the sky lobby on another trip to work with his dad, it had been quiet and mostly empty. Now it was dark, smoky, and crowded. People called out numbers. 86, 84, 79, 81. And Brandon finally figured out what they were saying. Their floor numbers, trying to connect with friends and coworkers, trying to find out who had made it and who hadn't. Nobody called out any numbers higher than 89. This is a madhouse, said Richard. The refugees from the 89th floor stayed close, holding each other's hands. Should we just keep going down? Esther said. If Richard had been hoping to find a person in charge, Brandon didn't see one. There was no firefighters, no police officers, not even building security guards. A dull blue light suddenly glowed above the heads of the crowd. It was a man holding up a cell phone. He was using the soft glow to lead a group of people to the stairwell on the other side. That guy looks like he knows what he's doing, Esther said. Maybe we should follow him? Brandon didn't know how anybody knew what they were doing. Not in this chaos. I'm with Esther, Anson said. He stood perfectly still, one hand clutching the handle on the harness of his dog and the other holding his cane. People bumped and cried out in panic all around him, but like Mr. Corey, Anson stayed calm. It was pretty clear coming down stairwell B, Richard said. I don't know why we would switch out all of a sudden. I'm with Richard, Brandon said. He had promised his father he'd stay with him, and besides, he liked Richard. We go, Mr. Corey said, still calm and assured. He, Esther, and Anson moved forward towards the stairwell that the man with the glowing cell phones had used, not back to the stairwell they had walked down. Richard and Brandon hesitated. Before they could decide where to go, someone called out, "Coming through!" The crowd parted for two men pushing another man in a wheelchair. Brandon's jaw dropped. He thought it must be hard for Anson trying to get out of the towers, but how terrifying must it be for someone trying to escape in a wheelchair? They couldn't use the elevators anymore, and they couldn't get down the stairs on their own. Just the thought of being trapped like that made Brandon shudder. The two men had to lift the wheelchair to get into the stairwell, and a crowd piled up behind them to wait. Richard and Brandon quickly became separated from Esther, Anson, and Mr. Quarry in the confusion. "Where are they? Do you see them?" Brandon asked Richard. Even jumping up and down, he couldn't see over the wall of people. "I don't know," Richard said. "I've lost them. I think they went down the stairs before the man in the wheelchair." Richard took a look around the crowd, waiting to go down the stairs, and pulled Brandon back the way they had come. "What are you doing? What about the others?" Brandon asked. "Even at Mr. Quarry's pace, we'll never catch up to them," Richard said. "Not with that wheelchair between us. Esther's still with them. They'll be all right as long as they keep moving, but we gotta get out of here too, and that line isn't going anywhere. I figure we're better off in the stairwell where we started. You okay with that?" "Yeah," said Brandon. He hated to leave the others, but it made sense. "It's just you and me now, kid," Richard told him. Brandon nodded in the darkness. He was okay with that too. The people on stairwell B moved steadily, 2 by 2, down flight after flight. Some of the doors to the other floors were locked or blocked by something, and Brandon hoped the people on those floors had found a different way out. Sometimes he and Richard would leave the stairs and cross a floor to see if another stairwell was faster, and along the way, Brandon would pick up phones on random desks just in case. Most of them didn't work. The few that did gave them busy signals when they tried dialing Richard's family and windows on the world. All 8 million people in the city must be trying to use the phone lines right now, Brandon thought. With each busy signal, Brandon's panic mounted. Was his father all right? Would the firefighters get to him in time? The first plane had hit the North Tower almost an hour ago, and he hadn't seen a single firefighter yet. And now they had a second building to worry about. Brandon's legs started aching by the time they reached the 44th floor sky lobby. He and Richard left the stairwell again to see if they could find Esther and the others, but things were even more chaotic here. The 44th floor had become kind of a hospital. There were EMTs and paramedics here, at last, helping the scores of people with broken limbs, cuts and bruises, and burns. Brandon wondered if the poor burned woman on the 90th floor was here, getting treatment, or if she had already been taken downstairs. People were moving every which way. Some of them were looking for a paramedic, others were looking for a stairwell. There was a line for the telephone at the security station, which apparently still worked, and a few people with cell phones were loaning them to other people to try to reach their families. Here, too, people were calling out floor numbers and names. Brandon looked around for Esther and Anson and Mr. Quarry, but didn't see them. Something massive crashed into the floor across the room, and everyone screamed. Smoke and debris shot through the crowd. People tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Brandon ducked and squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the flaming jet fuel that would burn him alive. No, he thought in terror, not another plane. Chapter 22, Rashmina, Poppies. Rashmina crouched low, staring down at a sea of poppy flowers wedged between 2 steep cannon walls. They were bright and pink and swayed gently in the mountain breeze, and they were right in Rashmina's path. Rashmina carefully climbed down the ridge and stood at the edge of the poppy field. How strange to see such a brilliant color here among all the brown of the mountains. The flowers were so thin, so delicate, and they moved back and forth as though they were people mingling at a party, like they were dancing. Rashmina wished she could just sit down and watch them. She was tired, pushed to the edge of exhaustion. She'd been running since she left her brother behind, taking shortcuts up and down rocky, desolate hills. She was desperate to get back to her village. If her father hadn't returned from the ANA camp yet, she had to hide Taz so the Taliban wouldn't find him. If Baba had returned and Taz was already gone, Rashmina still had to alert the villagers that the Taliban were coming. No matter what, the Taliban weren't going to be happy that the villagers had given Taz refuge, and it was all Rashmina's fault, just like Fasoon had said. Rashmina walked out among the poppies. The flowers are so tall they came up to her nose. The effect of standing among them, of almost being swallowed up by them, was magical. She wished the whole of Afghanistan were covered with the beautiful flowers, but Rashmina knew it couldn't be. People didn't grow poppies for their pretty pink colors. Poppy seeds had a gummy substance that were raw material for heroin. Heroin was a drug that took away people's pain. For many Afghans hurt by decades of war, it was the only kind of medicine they could find to erase that suffering and their awful memories. Afghan parents had long given the drug to their babies to ease earaches or in place of food to soothe their hunger pains. But Rashmina knew that heroin wasn't a medicine. It was an addictive, destructive drug that eventually killed everyone who couldn't stop using it, and addicts would do anything to get their next fix. Lie, steal, and even sell their own children. Poppies love the rocky, dry soil of the mountains, and it was easy to hide fields like this one high up in the mountains. You could get rich growing poppies for heroin, but you could get in trouble too. The Taliban made a lot of money that way to pay for more guns and bombs, so the United States destroyed any poppy fields they could find and arrested the farmers who had planted them. Rashmina put her hands out, brushing the stalks of the poppies as she walked, pretending for just a moment that they were nothing but beautiful flowers, not the source of so much agony and heartbreak. Rashmina's father refused to grow poppies, even though her family was very poor, and with Afghanistan getting hotter and drier, it was harder for Baba to grow real crops, like wheat and melons. Pasoon had fought with Baba about it, of course. Pasoon had argued that they'd only had to grow poppies for 1, perhaps 2 seasons, and they would make more money than they would see in a lifetime of growing food. It would be easier too. Every year there was less water, less usable land, and more chance the food crops would fail, and they would earn nothing. Rashmina knew Passoon was right about that part at least. But Baba had said growing heroin was a bad business, and against Islam, and that had been that. Rashmina put a hand to the side of her face, where her brother had hit her. Tears came to her eyes again, and her heart ached at his betrayal. But it was too late for that now. Passoon had made his choice, and so had she. Rashmina remembered her prayer in the Kochi camp, for God to show Passoon a different path. Her request was dua, a special request in time of need. According to their imam, the prayer leader in their mosque, God promised to answer a dua in one of 3 ways. The first and best answer was when God gave you what you asked for, right when you asked for it. The second was to give you what you prayed for, but at some later date. The third was not to give you what you asked for at all, but instead to prevent some other hardship or injury from happening to you. God certainly hadn't answered Rashmina's request by changing Passoon's path. Did that mean at some later time God would forgive Passoon and change her brother's heart? Rashmina hoped so. But she wasn't sure she could ever forgive her brother. Something red flashed against all that pink, and Rashmina froze. Patrolling the far edge of the poppy field was a man wearing a green tunic, a white turban, and a red scarf. It was a red scarf that had caught Rashmina's attention, but now all she could see was what the man carried over his shoulder, an old Soviet-era AK-47 rifle. Rashmina ducked low in the poppies and held her breath. Had the soldier seen her? She waited for long seconds, minutes, but no one came. Rashmina looked around, trying to figure out how she could escape. All she saw were poppies everywhere she looked. She could go back the way she'd come, but would that take too long? But if the soldier caught her, there was no telling what he would do. She had discovered his hidden, illegal poppy field. Sweat ran down Rashmina's face, and her heart thumped in her hard chest. She could not get caught. Slowly, carefully, as quietly as she could, Rashmina chanced another peek over the tops of the poppies. The red-scarf soldier leaned against a rock. He was turned away from her, smoking a cigarette. He wasn't paying particular attention to the poppy field, or anything really. That's why he hadn't noticed Rashmina as she came down through the pass. He was just a guard, and it must have been terribly boring to have to sit and watch a poppy field all day long, high up in the mountains where no one else could see you or talk to you. If she waited long enough, he would probably go to sleep. But Rashmina couldn't wait for that. She had to get past him, now. Rashmina inched forward and crouched, trying to squeeze between the tall poppies without making them move. She didn't know what she was going to do when she got to the end of the field. Throw a rock to distract the guard? Maybe he would wander off to relieve himself, and she could slip by. But every minute she waited was another minute the Taliban might be getting closer to her village. Snap! Rashmina pulled her foot back from the brittle poppy stem she stepped on and froze. Is somebody there? The guard called. Rashmina closed her eyes and silently cursed herself. Clack, clack. Rashmina's eyes flew open. She knew that sound. It was the guard cocking his rifle, making it ready to shoot. I see you, the guard cried. Come out with your hands up.